Day to the Williams Tractor Hotline. Dan Wolken, USA Today, covering college sports, and I guess this is kind of the business side too, talking about the name, image, and likeness conversation that the NCAA talked about today. Dan, good to have you with us today. How are you, Dan?
I'm all right. How are you guys?
Oh, we're doing good. Appreciate you stopping by. So
Yep.
There's a lot of unknowns here, but what are some knowns? We've been talking about it a little bit, but just what are some of the knowns that we have with what the NCAA announced today?
Well, I think the best way I can explain it is that the working group that has been working on this for a long time made recommendations that are kind of more conceptual than anything, and the next hurdle that had to be cleared was for the Board of Governors, which is basically, the group of college presidents who make these decisions, had to approve it. So once they gave the thumbs up to the recommendations, well, now there's a period where they can really drill down on it and put it into legislation. But, basically it's now gone from concept to that concept being approved to now they have to figure out how to codify it into NCAA rules.
So when this all started coming out, look, the NCAA has had their own problems with money and corruption and all of those sorts of things. But one thing I do know about the NCAA is that when this feels like they're giving a lot of ground right now, but they're ultimately going to want something in return. When do we finally start to hear what the NCAA is going to want? What's that going to look like?
Well, I don't know exactly what you're referring to.
Well,
look,
okay, just for instance,
is a little bit boxed in here.
Just for instance, just as an example, the NCAA is giving a lot of ground here, giving these players their freedom ultimately to go make money off their likenesses. The NCAA is going to want a piece of that somehow. It just doesn't make sense that they're giving all this ground and not going to want something back from them.
Well, no, I mean, here's the problem is California in February of 2019 started making noise about they were going to push a state law that essentially allowed college athletes in the state of California to profit off name, image, and likeness. And then other states have gotten on board, and now it's kind of half the country. And so the NCAA is a little bit boxed in here, and they're boxed in politically both at the state level and in Congress, where it's been a bipartisan issue, Democrats and Republicans essentially coming together to bash the NCAA and say that they're exploiting college athletes. And, I think the NCAA is not in a position of strength here, and they have not been for quite a while. So they've got to move these regulations and get this into their rule book and hope that it's enough to satisfy lawmakers, because what the NCAA does not want is 50 states having 50 different sets of rules around this name, image, and likeness issue, where then it becomes, okay, well, Florida's rules are more liberal and more there's more latitude for athletes in Florida than in Nebraska or whatever, and that becomes really problematic for trying to run a national organization. So the NCAA is trying to get Congress to do something, and of course that's not going to be easy for a variety of reasons. But they're not in position. The NCAA is not in a position to demand anything in return. I mean, this is the evolution that's happening, not at their own choosing, but they're having to respond to it because they don't have anybody on their side to say that they should keep doing what they've been doing.
We're talking with Dan Wolken from USA Today here on Ruscin Zach. Is the California law being passed, or any of the other, is that kind of the turning point? Like, how did we get? What was the linchpin that kind of said, okay, we've got to finally, the NCAA's finally got to discuss doing something like this?
Well, I think when more states got on board, I mean, California was the first domino, but then you started to see Florida and North Carolina and Tennessee and other states start to look at this, and it was a very broad spectrum of states. It wasn't just kind of one type. It was big states, small states, red states, blue states. And I think when you have that kind of consensus around an issue, it becomes very hard for the NCAA to continue arguing that it can just fight everything off. And obviously they've been dealing with all kinds of lawsuits. Their model has been challenged in court many times, and they've spent a ton of money trying to fight that. And they're just kind of at the breaking point. It all sort of adds up, and this is something that has been a long time coming. And even what they did today is not going to satisfy everybody, but it's a pretty big step.
If you were going to use just your gut feeling, how soon do you think you could actually enact something like this, get the framework done, get a working model going? Are we looking at a year, 2 years? Is this something the NCAA can just keep talking about because it sounds good? Could they drag this out 5 years if they wanted to?
No, I mean, they've committed to basically coming up with these rules this year, and they'll have all fall to massage them and get feedback and make modifications and whatever they need to do, and then they are going to vote on whatever rules they come up with next January. I mean, they've committed to do that, and they'd be crazy not to do that because some of these state laws, including Florida's, which I believe the governor is going to sign sometime soon, are supposed to go into effect next summer. So, I mean, there's a real time element and a real rush to action here that I don't think the NCAA can just sort of slough off.
Dan Wolken's our guest here on Ruscin Zach. Have there been any discussions about enforcement? Because, like you said in your column on usatoday.com, that if a car sponsorship costs $50,000 and the quarterback at whatever school is getting $500,000, I mean, how are they going to keep tabs on that if it's just money that ends up in a duffel bag when he completes the photo shoot or whatever?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is create a framework where any sort of activity around name, image, and likeness, if a player wants to go negotiate a deal of any type, any size, they have to disclose it to their school, and then there's a system by which those deals would be vetted to make sure that they fall within a normal range of activity for a similar type of deal. Now, exactly how that works and who polices it and who collects the data for comparison and what would be the ramifications if something didn't fall within that range, I don't know. And I can't sit here and tell you, and I don't think anyone can, that it will prevent something from happening under the table. That's a part of life and corruption in a lot of different areas. I'm just telling you what they're trying to do is give people the freedom and opportunity, whether it's, having 500,000 followers on Instagram and, the opportunity to get paid as an influencer, or to, go home and run a camp that's, sponsored by the quarterback from University of Arkansas, or, somebody getting, $500 to be a judge in a chicken wing eating contest. Those are the kinds of things that they're. I'm just saying.
Right.
When people say name, image, and likeness, everyone sort of goes to, they're going to be on a car dealership or commercial or Nike or whatever. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of things that are not like major deals. So those kinds of things are going to basically just hands off, and you go negotiate them and submit them, and we'll approve them. And as long as the school's not involved, and as long as it doesn't look like it's got anything to do with recruiting, then it's going to be allowed.
I read your article in the USA Today, and I read some other articles, and you were talking about the players being able to go out and negotiate their own deals. And one of the things I read yesterday said, well, who's going to negotiate the deal? And the word agent comes up. And the NCAA has worked really hard to keep agents off college campuses. Is this opening the door to bring agents back in?
Well, I mean, they really have not worked that hard, honestly, to keep agents out. I mean, they've actually, over the years, done more to bring them in, at least in recent times. I mean, college basketball players now, if you turn pro, you can essentially hire an agent to go through that process. and still come back to school if you don't like the feedback you get. I mean, hockey players in college have been able to essentially have agents for a while. So it's more expansion of that, and they're going to have to figure out a regulatory framework around that and trying to make sure people who are involved in guiding athletes on marketing deals are meet some sort of standard, which I don't know what that is, but they're going to have to come up with that too. This is creating a lot more regulatory work for sure, and that's going to be part of it. And we'll see how it works out.
Dan, one of the things we've talked about today here is kind of the emotional impact in fans and players, because at least here in Arkansas, there's always been this kind of understanding of, hey, look, the game didn't go well, but don't rip the players individually, all right? Blame it on the coaches or whatever. But now, if a fan sees a guy doing a YouTube show or Instagram stuff during the week, and then he goes out and throws 4 picks on Saturday, now that whole, hey, don't rip the players veil is out the window, isn't it?
Well, I mean, yeah, look, there's a human nature element to some of this stuff that just will come with the territory. I mean, if you are an athlete who is spending a lot of time, trying to figure out how to make money on Instagram and not as much playing sports, well, then at some point you're going to have to choose which is your preferred vocation, and I don't know how that's going to go. I'm sure some people will thrive in that environment. Some people will not. But that's part of being an adult is, trying to balance all the things you have to deal with and what opportunities you want to pursue and the cost benefit analysis of doing all kinds of stuff. So I don't really have an answer for you other than that.
One of the things you addressed directly in your article today is the EA Sports college football game. We've gotten questions about it today, and I mean, the schools themselves have always said no. How does this sort of affect, or does it affect, any part of that particular genre, the video game industry?
Well, the video games are a more complicated issue because there's a group licensing component to that. In other words, if you're going to have an EA Sports video game for college football, what you have to do is the NCAA or college football playoff or whatever, all the schools have to negotiate a deal with EA Sports for the use of their trademarks and logos and all of that. Well, part of that would be if the players are going to be able to make money off that the players would have to have a negotiation to secure whatever their piece of that pie is and how they were going to distribute that among their ranks. And, that's easy to do in the NBA and NFL and whatever because they have a players union. Well, college does not have a players union. So the NCAA stance as of now is that they're not going to go down that road of player representation, negotiating with the union, and thus they're not going to get involved in group licensing. Now, is that permanent? Is that forever? I don't know, but that's a whole other element to this that would require a lot of work and some delicate dancing in between the raindrops that I'm just not sure they are prepared to do and certainly don't want to go down at this time.
A lot of moving parts, a lot of tentacles off of this issue with college sports, no doubt about it. Dan Wolken, USA Today, with us here on Ruscin and Zach. Thanks, Dan, for the time. We appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, guys.
All right, Dan and all our